as he set type for them at midnight. Burning his thumb on a letter he cursed with affection. Father Binoti waits across from his chapel, his head bent low as if in prayer, though I know he is watching the shop like a saint protecting a sinner. Inside the agent's root and prize. They find invoices and receipts and catalogues nothing to hang an arrest upon, but material enough to suggest circulations that might be suspicious. The clerk with the quill becomes arrogant, reading aloud an address with the casual cruelty of a man cataloguing bodies. Each syllable becomes a small edict. It is then that I commit the deliberate act I have rehearsed in the small hours. I put a ledger on the counter. Not the secret one we keep under the false bottom, but an ordinary, bound ledger with a plain cover and a hand that looks municipal. I open it and set it with a slant that will catch a light from the window. It is conspicuous precisely because it is ordinary. I turn a page and let a folded paper fall on an unremarkable slip that I have printed with the ledger's neat typeface. To look at it is to feel the satisfaction of administrative logic. I do not shout. I do not make scene. I place it where the clerk will see it, where Madame Rousseau, obligingly peering at the counter, will also see it. A clerk's fingers brush it. His eyes register the possibility of triumph. A ledger, he says with the kind of glee one gets looking into a brazier. He opens and reads aloud. The name at the top is a familiar one, but the addition beneath is what I have planted, an annotation, in a different hand, suggesting the ledger has been altered, that certain names were inserted or removed. It is a small, plausible note, the kind of thing clerks make when they tidy a file. He sees what I would have him see, inconsistency. His satisfaction turns to confusion. At that cue, Bastien moves through the crowd like a wind pushing paper. Leaflets slide into hands. A woman in the market unfolds one and her eyebrows go up. "What is this?" she asks. They say the ledger had been amended. Someone answers. The murmur grows like a wave that finds new shape as it travels. Doubt is contagious when it is bought cheap. Inside the shop, the clerk's confusion becomes a ripple of irritation. He calls for the agent with the ledger. The agent, eager to exert order, flips through the ledger until he finds the line where I have arranged the marginalia in a public hand. There it is, a note that reads, tersely verified by municipal clerk, date changed. It is exactly the provocation I intend. He reads it and looks up. His expression has the sickened, incredulous air of a man who discovers a stain on his conscience. Jean Morel stands near the door, and the pause in his movement is the shape of mercy. He lets a moment pass. That moment is long enough for Bastien's leaflets to be read by a woman who knows the petitioner named and who bursts into a small, incredulous cry. That man is not the one they say, she tells those near her. I know him, he sells soap at the corner of Julian. The crowd tilts. A woman points, a boy shouts. Authorities are good at stating facts, but they are poor at imagining the gap between a written name and a living face. The agents begin to argue in low voices. The clerk wants to seize the ledger as evidence. The agent with the boots wants to arrest me for hiding contraband in plain sight. Jean steps forward, his hand on a file he had earlier set aside, and murmurs something that changes the tenor of the room. "We cannot take this shop," he says, and his voice is ordinary, not commanding, not without a warrant. It is a legal phrase, a small hinge. The agent sulks but opens his mouth to comply. The presence of the crowd and the uncertain ledger outside make things precarious. For a man who has been told to tidy the world, hesitation tastes like treason. Madame Rousseau, who has been watching like a woman at a theatre window, reaches for the binding I have set near the glass. Her fingers tremble and a note slips out from where I have tucked it in the spine. She frowns at it, then reads aloud. It is something gentle, an annotation in a hand she recognizes as mine. See also the clerk's ledgers, dated Julie. Ask for paper with watermarks. The clerk's face darkens. It is as if someone has suggested the existence of a mirror in a room he believed enclosed. Madame Rousseau looks up and sees the crowd outside, and then she looks at me. As if the shopkeeper had been bequeathed a part in a play she had always wanted to act in. Outside, people lean in toward one another. Bastien's leaflets, simple and clean, suggest alternate orders, lists that name not fate, but status: who provides bread, who mends shoes, who tends to ailing mothers. Their language is careful. They do not say revolution in a way that will make the head fall. They say reconsideration, verification. The idea takes root in hands that have never been custodian of authority: a washerwoman, a lamplighter, a clerk from the tribunal who has come early to oversee. They begin to talk in the same dialect they use when they bargain for fish, quick, practical, and astonished when they are offered a choice. The agents grow angrier because they think they can control the narrative by controlling goods. Their hands palm the ledger as if by holding it they could squeeze the doubt out of the town. They do not understand that if you teach people to doubt one document, you teach them to read the margins of many. The marginalia we have distributed are now in the hands of people who will keep them in sleeves, in aprons, on the underside of a bread board. I know this because I was once that woman who kept a note under her pillow. Jean Morel's hesitation becomes decisive when he misfiles an actual municipal order. He takes a stamped sheet and, with the gentleness of someone who folds the edges of a letter before placing it in an envelope, tucks it into a drawer and distracts the leading agent with an observation about a misprinted date. The agent, who has been counting names in his head like beads, follows the promise of clerical error, and in doing so allows Bastien and the leaflets to move further among the crowd. It is an ordinary theft performed for the sake of conscience. The clerk shows the ledger to an agent who declares it evidence, and whom I see in an instant, preparing the words that will hang a life. The agent's mouth presses into an administrative line: "You are under suspicion of collusion." It is the prelude to a list of arrests. It is the music that makes a guillotine's blade feel friendly in the ears of those who can't love the messy world. I feel the pressure at the base of my skull, that small drum of panic that signals the need for movement. But we had planned for movement that appears immobile. I take a book from the shelf and set it in the window. It is deliberate, a binding with my hand in the marginalia, the little scribble that indicates a correction. An added ledger note that suggests the ledger has been tampered with. Madame Rousseau lifts it with a ceremoniousness that would do a parish priest proud. The note flutters free and an agent catches it. He reads in the tense way a man reads a sentence he suspects of holding a knife. For a breath the city holds. Then a ripple breaks out from the crowd. A woman cries, "They lie," in a voice that breaks with exposure. A man who had been summoned to the tribunal last week and returned home because of a misfiled name starts to shout his protest. The murmur becomes a chorus. For a moment the authority of the ledger feels like a thin skin that can be pressed until it ruptures. People are looking at margins now, not at the headnotes. They are learning to treat a written name as an opinion rather than a verdict. The agents are flustered. Their certainty, what had felt in their limbs like a rightness, bobbles like a boat on a river. They attempt to reassert their power, but power that relies on silence and singular narratives collapses when the same silence is broken in many small places. Jean Morel's small acts, the misfiled paper, the soft voice, have not, in themselves, changed policy, but they have made room for doubt. Doubt is a public thing now. Commissaire Renaud's absence is felt as a tightening. The men left in his delegated presence grow meaner because fear of consequence thrums in their veins. They confiscate the planted ledger and thumb through it with a mixture of triumph and disgust. A forged entry, one mutters. He brandishes the book like a cudgel. Yet when he opens it he finds the ordinary receipts, names of customers, dates that smell of bread and soap. What would be damning to a man is ordinary to a shopkeeper. Evidence becomes a matter of taste. I stand at the back of the shop and feel sick with a physical nausea that is only partly fear. I am aware of particulars, the way the ink has dried on my fingers, the faint thread of a seam I had mended yesterday, the smell of lemon oil. Fear is a particular smell in the mouth, a copper on the tongue. I think of Lucy, where is she now, and of Tyne's thumbs on type. They are out on their errands, perhaps, or holed up in corners waiting to slip loose at a signal. The contingency of their survival feels like glass in my chest. The crowd's mood shifts in increments. There is no sudden conversion, only a lateral movement. People who had believed the ledger's authority now ask for corroboration. Shopkeepers check their receipts. A baker crosses the street to ask a neighbor whether the man named is indeed his supplier. The practicalities of life, who tends to the milk, who mends a shoe, begin to insist themselves against the polity of lists. It is somehow obscene how modern governance mistakes the arithmetic of names for the arithmetic of lives. When the agents at last gather their papers and the ledger, they are less triumphant than embarrassed. They have seized a book but not a certainty. They file out with the mechanical dignity of a man who has to present a result for his superiors, cognizant that although they have carried something away, their triumph is muffled by the fact that ordinary lives have pushed back. Jean Morel lingers, and his eyes meet mine. He makes an indecipherable small gesture, 2 fingers raised, and then lowered as if making a small benediction. I answer with the only word that seems useful: thank you. It is too small, perhaps, but it is honest. Outside, Bastien presses his final leaflet into a child's hand. Lucy appears through the press of bodies, her hair tied back, her face set like a struck bell. She nods at me as if to say, everything we meant to do we have done. The leaflets have reached the hands of a laundress, who keeps a ledger of her own. And she reads them with a frown and then a laugh that is near to outrage. She tucks the note into her apron and goes back to her washing. But the next day she will tuck another into a sheet to be dried on a line, and the note will travel. We have not won. There is no sudden collapse of the tribunal, no dramatic confession from a clerk that will sweep away the year's cruelties. But the seed has been planted in 1,000 small places. Marginalia travel more easily than proclamations, a note in a binding, a scrap in a pocket, a leaf between loaves. People will begin to ask to see the ledger's drafts, to question dates, to demand corroboration. Small acts of reading will become small acts of resistance. As the agents leave, their boots fall into the street with a rhythm that sounds to me like a retreat, but could be the measured steps of another advance. I close the door behind them with the quiet of someone closing a book. The shop is on its knees, shelves askew, dust corded on the floor, a primer open to a child's drawing, but it is still a shop. And in that continuing there is a stubbornness I would not trade for any ledger's certainty. Madame Rousseau lingers at the window and fingers the hem of her shawl as if in doubt about whether she had done right. Jean Morel walks away more slowly than the others. His head is bent as if he carries in it a ledger of small mercies. Bastien grins at me from across the street, his pockets heavier with the sensation of having been useful. When night comes, I set the shop to rights with hands that tremble. I push books back into place, but with each book I tuck another slip, some instruction, some correction, a margin that says, plainly question this. It is a small pedagogy. We will be patient. The city learns by habit and repetition. If we can teach one woman to hold a marginalia, another to look twice at a list, the ledger's authority will be hollowed not by thunder, but by persistent nibbling. There is a small thing I do before I extinguish the lamp. I take a pencil and, in the spine of an ordinary ledger, I write in a hand that is both careful and tired, names are not fate. It is not a slogan, it is a reminder to myself, like a note folded beneath a pillow. The words are small, and in that smallness there is the scale of our rebellion, not a single day overturned, but 1,000 days altered by the choice to read differently. The night closes, and in the street a cart rolls past, and somewhere a dog barks. I cannot say what will happen when Renaud hears of the day's events. He will be furious, he will call for prosecutions, he will want blood in the ledger. That is the problematic diplomacy of the guillotine. It requires spectacle to appear efficacious. But spectacle is brittle when the crowd mistrusts the program that produces it. I close the shutter with a hand that knows how to fold things away. My palms still smell of lemon oil and ink. I have the peculiar clarity of someone who has hid something in plain sight and watched the world choose how to see it. There is a certain vertigo in that clarity. The shop is quieter tonight, but not silent. I can hear the city breathing through its seams, the hum of other shops, the muttered gossip, the sound of a man counting coins at a table. We have bought for a day a sliver of doubt. That is no small thing. Doubt makes people ask questions, and questions make lists porous. It gives them errors to discover. It makes the administrative mind uneasy, because it knows how to deal only with columns that add up. Tomorrow the ledger will be gone from my counter, tucked into an agent's arm, carried to some chamber where quills will scratch in the dry light. But the marginalia are not so easily seized. They have been distributed like seeds and will sprout in laundries, in chapels, in the corners of workshops. I will sleep now with an alertness that is close to prayer. There are many nights ahead in which a knock may come. There are many times when courage will be mistaken for recklessness. But the sense of having moved the public a few inches away from accepting a name as fate is a kind of nourishment. It feeds the small rebellions, and small rebellions accumulate. Outside my window a dog barks again and then is still. The city exhales. I think of Lucy's bright hands, of Tina's plates cooling in a chimney, of Father Benoit's chapel, where secrets are kept like relics. I think of Jean Morel's two-fingered benediction and of Bastien's grin. We are not many, but we are witnesses. I put the lamp out, and in the dark the shop keeps its secrets beneath the false bottoms and the hollowed binding. The night is a lid on the day's small revolution. I am not certain what will come when the lid is raised, but I have a clarity that was not there before. Names can be contested. And when people learn to contest them, the ledger becomes a book one can annotate rather than a sentence one must obey. The guillotine slices wood and flesh alike. What it cannot cut easily is the habit of reading. We have begun to teach that habit. There is a knock at the back. I freeze and then, because I must know what the night brings, I stand and go to the door. The hook on the latch is cold beneath my fingers. I draw the bolt and open. A shadow leans in, breathless and small Lucy. Her eyes are bright with news. They read it in the market, she says. They showed the ledger and they asked, and they will look now. She breathes in like someone who has swallowed air after deep diving, and is alive because she rose. That is all she says. I shut the door with my heart at fever. The next day will be a reckoning. But for now the shop is a small island of ink and paper, where a different kind of counting has begun. We will sleep in shifts. We will hide the plates that cannot be burned. We will teach how to read a marginal mark as one teaches a child to tie her shoes. Outside, the city will spin its own stories, some of them about treason, some about bravery. Inside, I make another note and tuck it into the spine of an ordinary ledger. Remember to teach the next reader how to look. It is a small injunction and perhaps the most important of all. The bookshop beneath the guillotine keeps its doors open by teaching people to look at the margins. The night hangs heavy, and I am awake with a quiet resolve. I do not know whether, in the morning, Renaud will come with more men or with a summons. I do not know whether my name will be next in the ledger. I only know that today we have made an appointment with doubt, and that doubt has arrived. The city will have to reckon with the fact that a ledger's authority is nothing without a public that believes it. Tonight, that belief has been questioned. Tomorrow we will see whether the question can take root. I lie down with the feeling that the world has shifted a few inches on its axis, small enough that no cart will tip, large enough that a new path appears through the market. A path made not by slogans but by notes tucked into bindings, by leaflets pressed into frayed hands, by the small labor of reading differently. The guillotine still waits in its square. The ledger still exists in some municipal chamber. But inside 1,000 pockets and under 100 pillows a whisper will be kept. Names are not fate. Outside, the lamps gutter, and a watchman calls the hour. Inside the room a moth circles the dying flame and then falls. I close my eyes and listen to the city breathe. The choice we forced is not yet decided, but we have given the city the instrument with which to make it, marginalia, counter lists, and the habit of asking. If the tribunal wants to punish us, it will have to do so in a world that has begun to read differently. I sleep with that small defiant hope. When I dream, it is not of the blade but of pages, a book whose margins keep widening until the text itself can hardly be read for the notes. I wake with the certainty that our danger is also our instruction. The shop is searched and found ordinary. But ordinary is where we live, and ordinary is where we will teach dissent. The lamp is nearly out. I rise, and the day already thins toward a dawn that will be louder than this one. The city's markets will speak. The ledger's keepers will count. We will continue to teach the habit of reading the margins. A bell in the street rings. Someone calls out the hour. I take up a pencil and write a final line in the margin of a book I will leave for a customer. When you see a name, ask for its proof. It is not a law, it is an instruction. The day waits to be rid. I was careful with every step I took that morning, as if the stone itself were a page that kept its own gloss and would remember where my heel had pressed hard enough to leave an indentation. The tribunal's steps rose in broad shallow tiers, worn smooth by shoes and by the scrape of wagons. They had the look of a thing that expected petition and condemnation in equal measure. From my bookshop they had always been a distant punctuation, something that finished a scene in the square. But that morning they were an altar. It felt obscene, even before I began, to bring books to an altar that measured the end of human lives with a blade and a registrar's hand. But altar is a room of witness, and I had come to make witness in a register other than the state's ledger. The square gaped and filled with people as if a tide had been called back and a new, uncertain current was slopping into place. I had arranged nothing with the formality of a committee. I had handled small things, leaflets folded in the way Tian taught me, a plate wrapped in oiled cloth and tucked beneath his coat, a handful of my own annotated pages that could be read aloud like contraband prayers. The memory of Lucy's face young, a bruise under one eye, hair dusted with ash from the night they freed her, kept me from trembling. Her courage had been a chisel at my stubbornness. I stood on the steps not because I believed I would be believed, but because some truths are owed to those who have been named. Commissaire Lucien Renaud arrived with the punctuality of ledgered things. He did not make a grand entrance. There was no need. The tribunal's presence is a complex grammar, a uniform, a ledger, the slow, practiced motion of a quill. He moved with the confidence of a man who has learned the world's answers and has them neatly arrayed in columns. His coat was a dark rectangle against the square's lighter faces. His ledger, a leather-bound volume, was carried like a reliquary. When he climbed the steps, he did so as a man who knows that stone responds to weight by showing polish, a proof that his kind of weight had been here before. For a long moment nothing happened of consequence. The crowd settled into a hush like a page lying face up, waiting. There were smells: stale straw, the soar of damp wool, the hint of iron that never quite leaves a square like this. And there were smaller things, the whisper of a cloak, the nervous scrunch of a child's shoes on grit. The way the light off the tribunal's far aid made the commissaire's jaw look white and hard. I felt as if I had been reading for years and only now reached a punctuation where the sentence could be broken. "You stand in front of the tribunal," he began, "because men of his craft begin with the obvious, the sentence that sets the world in place, and you speak to the people." His voice carried like someone used to asking questions whose forms never change. "You will not accuse the Republic of carelessness. You will not call into question the certainty of its instruments. I let him have that beginning. It was a neat sentence to pin a year to. I listened to the clerkly cadence as if reading marginalia for a mistake, and then I said my first words. I will not accuse the Republic of carelessness, I said, and it is worth a small honesty that my voice did not sound like a trumpeter's. It was a bookseller's voice, plain and steady. I will only tell a truth some of you know and most of you have been taught to forget. Lists are written by hands, not by the heavens. There was a little stir, not of anger but of something else, like a page turning unexpectedly. Renaud's eyes moved toward me with the quick calculation of someone being struck a little off balance, like a clerk finding a misaligned line of type. He made the motion of looking down at his ledger as if to confirm an entry. His quill scratched. For all his composure, there is a thing that betrays the bureaucrat. He wants his paper to say he is right. Proof, he said. You can make accusations, Madame la Maire. Produce proof or cease. Proof. The word tasted like iron. I had come prepared, which is to say I had learned the practical mercy of bringing objects into argument. Arguments that happen in the air tend to be reabsorbed by men such as he. Arguments that happen under the eye of a crowd do not evaporate so easily. Tyne stepped forward then, as if the press had its own will to speak. He carried something small and wrapped. The oiled cloth had the smell of lathe and flour and a faint sweetness of linseed. He unfolded it with the slow, reverent movements of a man who has done penance by cleaning type. He revealed a steel plate, small as an old coin. Type rose from the surface, tiny letters, names set as if waiting to be read aloud. Even close to, it held its own darkness. The name was there, in raised relief, manufactured to be inked and impressed. In Tian's hands the plate looked like a sacrament. The crowd leaned in as if a tide of hearing answered the sight. This is not prophecy, Tian said. He did not shout. Shouting would have been fiddly and theatrical. He let his hands cradle the plate like a confession. This is craft. See how the edges are filed. See the tiny error in the second line, Marie. Do you remember? I nodded and told them the story of the clerk who had confessed to Father Benoti how a narrow economy of information had been built by tradesmen of fear. Father Benoti, pale and steady, stepped forward then. There is a certain way clerics make their timber public. They speak as if to the absent, and in the same gesture make the present listen. He spoke of a man who had once been a clerk at the tribunal, who had taken to drinking and to telling too many confessions as if those words could straighten crooked yearnings into order. The clerk had said what he had been told to say. He had been taught which names to believe and which to suspect. Names, the clerk said, sometimes came not from a revelation but from a table where arguments about property and grudges were argued and then translated into a list. For the first time I heard a face within the ledger. It was a small, tired face, the face of somebody who had learned to make lists for a living and forgot that lists are acts. The crowd's murmurs shifted into a different current. There were open mouths and held breath and the sound of cloth being smoothed as people tried to press down reflexive fear and find thought instead. Renaud countered by calling for order and then for testimony that would show forgery. He lifted his own ledger, and even the act of raising it was theatrical, because the ledger is his authority as a man is his name. You would trade the order we have bled for, he said, for the vagaries of gossip, for a single plate. Where is your proof that the ledger was edited to fit interests, and not to protect the public? He spoke as if the syllables were counters that could be arranged until the accusation fell flat. I answered by handing the pages I had copied to any who would take them counter lists, marginalia, the clerk's confession written as a vouched statement. The small notes that I had stashed into bindings read them, I said. See that the ledger changes. See its handwriting where you expect decree. See its margins where you expect law. It is not a prophecy. It is an instrument of power, and it is made by people who can be bribed, frightened, fooled, or mistaken. There is a way in which reading aloud is itself an argumentative device. People believe what they can hear with their own ears. I read